Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Patriots History of the United States. Hold on, let me fix something. Drives me crazy if my background ain't backgroundish enough. Okay, there we go. I'm Larry Swikart, co-author of Patriots History of the United States. Okay, so a lot of housekeeping. First, if you don't have your 20th anniversary edition update, email me at larry@wildworldofhistory.com and I'll send it to you. Now, this is not a full book. It's a PDF of a new chapter that goes from 2018 to 2023, but it also includes about 20 typewritten pages of new insertions of new research that goes throughout the book. You can use them or not when you're reading the book, but it would do something like this. It would say on page 192, after the third full paragraph, ending in Madison thought otherwise, insert, and then I'll give you some material to put in there. It's all from new research I've done since the last edition. So we would prefer if you would join through the newsletter. If you scroll way down on wildworldhistory.com, you'll find a thing to sign up for the newsletter. Believe me, there's a lot of stuff there you're going to want to see. We're giving away free stuff. We're giving away special offers, especially since we're done with the early buying season for curriculum. We're going to be looking for ways to assist your teaching and make you better teachers at a low cost. We're talking just tens, 20s of dollars, not hundreds, okay? So keep checking those offers out. Remember, if you don't have my copy of Globalism, Patriots History of Globalism, grab that. But otherwise, if you want 20th anniversary edition update PDF, email me at larry@wildworldofhistory.com and I'll send it to you. Now, I am hard at work. Well, not very hard. I've worked harder. Folks, it's just between you and me. I'm one of the laziest people you've ever seen. I swear, you've written 30 books. If I wanted to work, I could have written 50. I take a lot of time off. But I also read a lot, which helps. But I am working on a new book called America in the 21st Century. And it'll basically be the last 25 years. So it'll be what we couldn't say in Patriots History of the United States just because there wasn't enough room about the last 25 years. And that's due out sometime in 2025. Okay, let me see. What else do we need to talk about? If you're into politics, go over to my Wild World of Politics and sign up for the Insider. It's $6 a month. Can't beat it. And I give you 3 15 to 20 minute commentaries, Larry's commentary, 3 days a week on what's happening now. And remember Flip Wilson and the Church of What's Happening Now? And I'll give you discussions about polling, about Harris's recent pick of Tim Walz's Veep, all these kinds of things like that, and try to get into some of the numbers that you might not hear otherwise. It's well worth it. Lastly, this coming November 5th, I, Ash Epp, and Seth Keschel will be doing live election night coverage. I did this with Tracy Beans and Rich Barris back in 2020. And even though we had some technical glitches, it was a hit. We had almost 1 million viewers, and people were dropping out of Fox News and CNN to watch us because we were entertaining, but we were honest and truthful. So check that out, and you can look for us at decisionusaonline.com. That's decisionusaonline.com. Okay. So we are with the 15th anniversary edition. And let's see, where did we leave off? I think we stopped. I didn't see where we stopped last time. Okay, I'm going to just start with the second full paragraph on page 396, because in my notes, I was looking at something else. I wanted to add some material on the Trump impeachments on the previous pages. And so I forgot to mark down where I ended last time, but it's somewhere on page 396. I'm going to just start in the second full paragraph. Johnson vainly attempted to form a Lincoln-style coalition, but he could not win the nomination of his own party. Obviously, he wasn't Lincoln. Instead, the Democrats turned to Horatio Seymour, New York's wartime governor, who castigated Lincoln as a dictator and despot, and who called Irish draft rioters my friends. Republicans had no trouble painting Seymour as a copperhead, nor was he helped by a new wave of Klan racial violence in the South. Seymour's running mate, Frank P. Blair Jr., remember he's always called Blar, Frank Blar of Missouri, made matters worse by referring to, quote, the corrupt military despotism that still governed the South. Well, they had a point, but the other point was their party should have been banned. Statements such as Blar's terrified Northerners. Edward Pierpont, a Democrat from New York City, wrote, quote, I cannot conceive how any intelligent man who does not wish the rebels returned to power and the lost cause restored can vote against Grant. So Grant is going to be the Republican nominee. Grant hewed to the traditional Republican agenda: high tariffs, internal improvements, and above all, stability and moderation toward Reconstruction affairs. Man, does that sound like Trump? Huh? Stability, economic growth, tariffs instead of high taxes, internal improvements. Remember, fix our cities. I mean, anybody that thinks that Trump is not right in line with the traditional Lincoln, Grant, Reagan programs is nuts. There's a few things he would have disagreed with Reagan on, particularly jobs going abroad, which I think Reagan would repudiate today if he were back. But nevertheless, it's very much a straight line from Lincoln all the way to Trump. A gold standard supporter. Grant nevertheless supported the Pentland Plan for paying off federal bonds with greenbacks unless specifically stated that they be paid in gold. Paying for the war debt in greenbacks represented a commitment to slight inflation. For most voters, though, Grant, not the platform, was the deciding factor in his campaign. Let us have peace appealed to people of both sections. In the election, despite the absence of three still unreconstructed states, 78% of eligible voters cast ballots. Grant received 53% of the popular vote, despite the fact that Seymour got almost 200,000 votes from Kentucky and Louisiana alone. Wow. Grant smashed Seymour in the Electoral College 214-80. Again, showing that the popular vote is fairly irrelevant in these national elections. For example, today, and I don't believe they're not going to stay the same, but even if they did stay the same, these polls that show Harris up 1 or 2 points nationally, irrelevant. That's not enough to carry the Electoral College. A Democrat today has to be up 4 points to win the Electoral College. Some 500,000 blacks voting for the first time thus decided the election. Seymour took the highest electoral state, his home state of New York, but Grant took most of the North and swept the Midwest and all the West except Oregon. So on page 397 in the header, Grant and the era of good stealings, in quotation marked, because it used to be called remember the era of good feelings under Monroe. So this is sometimes called the era of good stealings. A reluctant politician, Ulysses S. Grant was as unimpressive in person as was Johnson. Sad-eyed, of average height, possessing a low musical and penetrating voice, Grant punctuated his speech by frequently stroking his slight beard with his left hand. Courteous and capable of effusive laughter, Grant in portraits nevertheless looks as though he were attending a bullfight or a funeral. Full of personal contradictions, he puzzled even his best friends, including cartoonist Thomas Nast, who contributed mightily to the 1868 campaign. Quote, 2 things elected me, Grant later said, the sword of Sheridan and the pencil of Thomas Nast. Early in his life, Grant and Longstreet had been close, and after Fort Sumter, he came to rely heavily on Sherman. Unlike Lincoln, who never lacked confidence around men of better education or status, Grant, according to Hamilton Fish, later as Secretary of State, was uncomfortable in the presence of highly literate or well-traveled men. Possessed of a detailed and organized memory, I'm not, this is going to sound strange. Usually, if I'm in the presence of people who are much more highly educated than me, I think they don't know a lot. They don't know what ordinary people know. I've got one friend in particular, genius, absolute brilliant financial genius. And I'm constantly shocked by how little he knows about popular culture, about what goes on with ordinary people. Let me take just a break from here. Okay, let me give you a book to read. Charles Murray, Murray, Coming Apart. And Murray's book is a look at white America since I think it's 1980. Could be earlier, but I think it's 1980. Murray previously had done a book on Black America, Losing Ground, where he said that the welfare system was responsible for destroying the Black family, which in turn destroyed the Black economy. 100% right. Well, this book, Coming Apart, looks at the schism. And that's how you say it, by the way, schism, not schism. I learned that from Rush Limbaugh's sponsor, Verbal Advantage. It's schism. Anyway, the schism between the middle and lower classes in America of whites and the upper classes. And first, I'll tell you a story about J.D. Vance, President Trump's vice presidential nominee. Vance, you remember, wrote the book Hillbilly Elegy, which is very much about these class differences. The area Vance is talking about in his book, or writing about in his book, a book doesn't talk, was Middleton, Ohio, which was less than, 15 miles from where I taught in Dayton, Ohio. And to do certain academic projects down there frequently, I would drive through Middleton and see the very destruction that the deindustrialization of AK Steel and some of the other industrialized plants, manufacturing plants down there in Middleton had done. I know exactly what he's talking about with Hillbilly Elegy. So anyway, Vance, when he got to Washington, D.C. as a senator, took some of his friends, wanted to take him to dinner, and said, let's go to Cracker Barrel. Cracker Barrel. You eat there? Nothing wrong with Cracker Barrel. It's good. I like their breakfast, right? But this is the attitude of these elites. So back to Charles Murray. I had not lost my place, to quote Rush Limbaugh. Murray has in his book something you all should take. It's a little out of date because he references a number of movies and TV shows that no longer are popular. But nevertheless, take the test. It's called the bubble test. And he asked 25 different questions about culture. Everything from, have you ever been in a parade that was not a gay rights or an environmental parade? Do you have any friends that smoke? Have you ever worked a job in your life where you hurt at the end of the day? And one of my favorite questions was he showed 5 military insignias. And he said, can you name what these insignias, what rank they represent? And you give yourself a certain number of points for each of the questions you answer correctly. And if you're low on the bubble test, it means you live in a bubble. And you have no clue as to what's going on with ordinary people, because he backs up all of this with the millions and high percentages of people who smoke, who attend parades regularly, who saw these TV shows that nobody else sees, who eat in restaurants like Cracker Barrel or Chili's or Red Lobster or places like that the elites would never deign to eat in. and so on and so forth. It's a wonderful test. And some of you, especially you parents, may be surprised at how bubbleized you've become just by attitudes of your friends and so forth. So anyway, I gave this test to my classes every year, and I had one female student who got a 0. She was so bubbleized. She didn't know a single person who smoked. She had never worked a job where she hurt at the end of the day. She didn't know any of the military insignias. She never ate at any of these restaurants, never watched any pop TV, never saw any of the top rated movies, and so on and so forth. So it's a very worthwhile thing to do. So anyway, I don't know why I brought that up. Why did I bring that up? He came to the sure. Oh yeah, operating around educated people. So I'm not bragging, but I was invited 90 or 91. I can't remember when. It wasn't that important to me. I was invited to go to a meeting. I'd never even heard of this group called the Montpellerin Society, spelled Montpellerin, Montpellerin. And it was founded by great guys, Friedrich von Hayek and Milton Friedman. After World War II in the 50s, it was founded to preach and expand free market ideas and ideas of liberty. Fine, okay. Well, they brought me some economists, I don't know, people of different backgrounds, political scientists. I don't remember anybody from English or sociology or anthropology. There could have been, I just don't remember them. But they brought maybe a dozen of us people over, and we were young scholars. And what they were trying to do is recruit us because Montpellerin Society wasn't getting any young blood. But as members of the Montpellerin Society, I went into a room with these guys. There were 5 Nobel Prize winners in this room. And it wasn't a big gathering. It was like 30, 40 people. There were 5 Nobel Prize winners, and I wasn't one of them, right? I had nothing to talk to these guys about because they were all pretty much at Northwestern, Stanford, Yale, Penn, Harvard. And even though they had probably come from more middle class, working class backgrounds, their lives now were such that we didn't have much to talk about. And certainly I wasn't on their mental level because they were all geniuses. And this included Milton Friedman, James Buchanan, Gordon Tullock, Douglas North, a couple of others. I even ended up debating Milton Friedman on a barge going down the Danube River as a part of this whole thing about free banking versus the Federal Reserve. I think I won. I don't think he'd think so, but I think I won. Anyway, so my point is that Grant had this same characteristic. He wasn't comfortable around highly educated people because I'll tell you this, if you're not ready to tell them they're wrong and to be ready to explain to them why they're wrong, usually not in terms of statistics and whatnot, but in terms of everyday evidence, you can be intimidated, and you don't need to be, because statistics are one thing, but experience is another. And no, you can't prove everything by experience, but you certainly can't prove everything by statistics either. All right, let's get back to the text. Possessed of a detailed and organized memory, Grant could tell spellbinding stories and later wrote a military memoir considered the finest since Caesar's. When Grant claimed to be a simple soldier, he meant it. Once he put his trust in someone, he clung to them ferociously, and his loyalty led him to associate with self-interested leeches who had no compunction about betraying his faith in them, including his son-in-law. He viewed the presidency from the old Whig tradition where the legislature made the laws and the president merely served as a check. To that extent, Grant had failed to absorb the massive changes in federal and presidential power that had occurred during the Civil War. That's really big. The guy that came after Lincoln, I'm not even including Johnson, needed to understand what had happened under Lincoln. For right or wrong, it doesn't matter. That's the way of the world. That's the way things were. And had he more skillfully understood that and wielded power based on that, I think he would have been considered a much greater president. Congress was all too happy to continue to direct Reconstruction, but the Republicans' first concern involved a diagnosis of the last election, which revealed that the great deal of Democratic strength still remained in the country. Had blacks not voted in numbers they had, or had most of the former Confederates who were legally allowed to vote not boycotted the election, the Republicans could have suffered severe setbacks. Ensuring that blacks maintained the franchise, therefore, emerged as a top priority for the radicals, who sought to make black voting rights permanent. Grant had not even taken office when Congress passed the 15th Amendment, February 1869, that forbade any state from depriving a citizen of his vote because of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. The recalcitrant southern states, Texas, Virginia, Mississippi, that had not yet ratified the 14th Amendment finally gave in, ratifying both the 14th and 15th, and all three had rejoined the Union by 1870. Obedience in any of these states, however, still largely rested on the bayonets of Yankee troops. Georgia proved that in 1868 when, after federal military forces withdrew, the state legislature expelled all black legislators until the return of the federal troops again imposed Northern order. Probably many Southerners otherwise harbored humane and reasonable intentions toward the freedmen, but equality enforced at bayonet point hardened their antipathy toward the North even more. To those white Southerners, all of Reconstruction was a facade, a ruse to conceal the Northerners and the Republicans' true objective of crushing the South politically, economically, and culturally. And I would say it shouldn't have been the South, it should have been the Democrat Party that was crushed. Grant had scarcely taken office and certainly not yet started to grapple with Reconstruction when his unfortunate associations plunged his administration into a scandal. On September 24, 1869, in Wall Street's Gold Room, two of the most infamous speculators in the country, Jim Fisk and Jay Gould, attempted to corner the market on gold. What ensued was Black Friday, where gold prices skyrocketed thanks to their backroom manipulations. Fisk and Gould had involved Grant's brother-in-law, Abel Corbin. I said son-in-law, it's brother-in-law. Abel Corbin, who acquired insider information from Grant over dinner. Basically, Corbin laid out a hypothetical to Grant. He said, by the way, sir, what would you do if the price of gold started to, say, skyrocket? Would you sell? Would you have the Treasury sell gold to offset this, to bring the price down? Grant's not even paying attention to this stuff. No, I wouldn't do anything. Because he wasn't seeing what was happening to it, right? Corbin relayed that information to speculators that in the event of a run on gold, the federal government would not sell its gold and thus the price would rise, which is what they were counting on. Fisk and Gould had a long history of attempting to manipulate markets. As my friend Bert Folsom calls them, they were political entrepreneurs, not market entrepreneurs like Andrew Carnegie, Cornelius Vanderbilt, John D. Rockefeller, and many others. They wanted to get rich by manipulating the government. Along with Daniel Drew, they had fought Commodore Cornelius Vanderbilt over the Harlem Railroad in 1864, where they lost big. Now, 5 years later, Fisk and Gould were attempting another speculation. Armed with foreknowledge that the federal government would not sell any new gold, the conspirators started to buy all they could get at $135 an ounce. Once they cornered a supply of gold and driven the price up to $160, they would dump the gold and take all the profits. For a while, it appeared they would succeed, but Grant, informed of the situation by his Secretary of the Treasury, ordered the Treasury to sell gold and stabilize the price. Gould escaped with several $1 million in profits, far below his expectations. Grant had in no way acted improperly, but the Fisk-Gould connection and Corbin tarnished his administration at an early stage. A second scandal, Credit Mobilier, tainted many congressmen and reached into Grant's administration, but did not involve him personally again. The Credit Mobilier scandal was the logical result of using massive public funding for the transcontinental railroads, specifically the Union Pacific and the Central Pacific. To that extent, the trail to Credit Mobilier must first go through Promontory Point, Utah, where the transcontinentals met in May 1869. Funding for the transcontinental railroads originated with a grant of 44 million acres of land and $61 million in federal loans, reflecting the urgency Congress placed on construction. Railroads could sell the land and use the proceeds for construction. So they're going to sell the land and build a railroad with the money they got from selling the land. The Pacific Railroad Act of 1862 enabled the Union Pacific to lay rails westward from Omaha, while the Central Pacific started in Sacramento and headed east. The idea is they're going to meet up. Congress put ridiculous incentives into the legislation, benefits given to the railroads that right-thinking legislators should have known would breed corruption on a massive scale. For example, the railroads received 20 alternating sections of federal land and, in addition, received a staggered series of cash loans for each mile of track constructed. $16,000 for flat land, $32,000 for hilly terrain, and $48,000 in mountains. Naturally, the railroads had a stake in laying as much track on as much difficult terrain as was humanly possible. Now, just beyond being stupid, what's that going to do when trains actually have to run on those tracks? Well, if you're going uphill, you're going to burn more fuel, right? It's going to be costlier to run your route than if you ran on flat land. Historian Burton Folsom Jr. summarized how Congress's misincentives shaped the railroad company's strategy. Quote, they sometimes built winding, circuitous roads to collect for more mileage. They used cheap and light wrought iron rails, soon to be outmoded by Bessemer rails. The Union Pacific Vice President Thomas Durant, who was the kind of antagonist in the series Hell on Wheels, complained to his staff members, quote, you are doing too much masonry. Substitute wooden culverts for masonry wherever you can. Well, it's not going to hold up as well. It's going to collapse, you idiot. They used fragile cottonwood trees because they were handy, stealing farmers' timber and reasoning that it was public land anyway. With government dollars backing the railroad's every move, who could argue otherwise? Moreover, the railroads also meandered in search of mineral rights, leading the Northern Pacific through the Black Hills. That's another Pacific railroad that was funded by the government, through the Black Hills of South Dakota and fomenting the Sioux Wars. Union Pacific's chief engineer, Granville Dodge, laid track on ice, and the whole line had to be rebuilt in the spring. Crossing unsettled land invited Indian attacks, requiring that half the workers at any site stand guard while the other half worked. Climaxing the wasteful affair when the Union Pacific and Central Pacific came within the vicinity of each other, work crews began gang fights and built parallel lines as long as Congress tolerated it. So rather than join up, they were building beside each other to keep getting money. Finally, even the federal government had enough, and lawmakers demanded the two lines link up. The subsidized transcontinentals linked their nation only after phenomenal waste, a task James J. Hill later did without federal aid. This is no small point. It would have become common fare in the 20th century to point to the transcontinental railroads as an effective example of government's involvement in supporting industries or companies that it labeled desirable. That's called industrial policy. Yet even the subsequent transcontinental railroads that received government support, such as Henry Villard's Northern Pacific, all failed or had to be reorganized in the Panic of 1893. Only Hill's free market line survived intact because it was built with profit, not subsidies, in mind. Even as the golden spike was being driven, both railroads were already planning to rebuild and even relocate the track to cover shoddy construction. It was 1874 between the Union Pacific finished fixing the new track it had just laid years before. Credit Mobilier scandal had its roots in this perfidious use of government money. The corruption was brought into the open because the company was formed in 1864 solely as a means to prop up the sinking Union Pacific stock. Congress charter required the railroad to sell its stock for cash at $100 par value, but the price sank almost immediately upon issue as investors questioned whether or not the railroad could even be built. Thomas Durant came up with the concept of forming a new arm, Credit Mobilier, whose stockholders were identical to the Union Pacific's stockholders. Under the scheme, the railroad would give construction contracts to Credit Mobilier, boosting its stock, which would then balloon the costs of construction to double the genuine expenses. Union Pacific paid Credit Mobilier with its own checks, which the directors of the credit company promptly used to purchase railroad stock at the par value of $100 a share, boosting its stock value. Looked at another way, Durant had managed to get the railroad to buy its own stock. He then had Credit Mobilier sell the stock on the open market far below par. The scam, while convoluted, nevertheless boiled down to Durant's giving stockholders profits from the sales of Union Pacific stock on the open market, which had been sanitized up to par value by washing it through the Credit Mobilier laundry. In the process, the directors and stockholders of Credit Mobilier had made outrageous profits from the overbilling of the railroad, all funded by Uncle Sam's land grants and loans, and had also made profits from the resale of the watered stock. As if those gains weren't enough, a number of congressmen, James A. Garfield of Ohio and James Brooks of New York, senators, James Patterson of New Jersey, and Grant administration officials, including the vice president, Schuyler Colfax, were given generous Credit Mobilier holdings to ensure they did not turn off the money spigot. Scholars estimate that the corrupt directors and congressmen skimmed between 13 million and 23 million from the Union Pacific through Credit Mobilier. Got to remember that's in 1860. That's hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars in today's dollars, which was finally exposed by the reporting of Charles Dana's New York Sun in 1872. Interesting that at this time, the major newspapers had ceased being political propaganda organs and had started to be independent newspapers. Once again, Grant was not directly implicated, but could not escape guilt by interference. Other scandals quickly followed, including the whiskey ring, the Veterans Administration scandal, and the exposure of the Secretary of War, William W. Belknap, for accepting bribes in return for the sale of Indian trading posts. Grant's reputation suffered further blows. He is in charge, after all. Missing in the moralizing of both pundits of the day and subsequent historians is the key issue. Such corruption tracked precisely with the vast expansion of the federal bureaucracy. If you weren't giving away so much government money, there wouldn't have been so much corruption. People acted no better or worse in the 1870s than they had in George Washington's day. There just were fewer opportunities in Washington's day. What had changed was that the opportunity for graft combined with the incredible profit to be gained from corruption, causing one historian to label this the era of good stealings. This malignancy owed much to the existence of the growth of government. Scandals in the Grant era turned the liberal critique of the Gilded Age on its head. Far from laissez-faire capitalism necessitating government regulation, it was an orgy of government intervention that caused the corruption and fed it. They should have reformed government, not business. The best reform Americans could have enacted that decade after Grant would have been to roll back the antebellum levels of subsidies, benefits, tariffs, and favorable land grants to railroads and other bonuses given to special interests. Yet the reformers learned precisely the wrong lesson from these events. Okay. Just in time. Got a frog in my throat. I'll see you guys next time.